"We sold the house, Dad. You're going to have to be out by the end of the month." Just like that. Dry. Cold. No, "How are you, Dad?" No hug, no smile, not even a look of respect. He just walked in with that skinny lawyer, the one in the navy blue suit holding a folder, and dropped the sentence like he was delivering a random package. I was sitting right there, with my black coffee and a warm piece of toast with jam on my plate. I looked at the two of them, took a quiet bite, chewed slowly, and didn't say a word. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 81 years old, born and raised in Philadelphia, though I live down in the South Philly neighborhood now. I've lived almost my whole life in this same house, a simple but warm place I built with my own two hands, brick by brick, with my wife, Rose Ellen. Every corner of this house holds a story. This is where my children took their first steps, said their first words. This is where I cried when I lost my Rose, and where I also learned to be silent when the world wanted me to scream. Because some pain isn't meant for shouting. It's meant to be swallowed. The lawyer seemed uncomfortable, like he knew he was part of something wrong. He was a young guy, no older than 30. He wore thin-rimmed glasses and spoke in a polite but distant voice. He opened the folder, took out some papers, and laid them on the table. "Your son and his wife have already signed the sales contract. The property is legally transferred. You just need to vacate the premises." I didn't even touch the papers. I kept eating my toast, took a sip of coffee, and wiped my mouth with the napkin in my lap. "Interesting," was all I said. Not a single emotion showed on my face, but inside, my chest was on fire. I could see myself in that moment, an old man with thick hands, weathered skin, a face full of the marks of time, but with eyes that were still alive, very much alive. I knew what this meant. It wasn't just losing the house, it was being discarded, like an old piece of furniture, a nuisance. And the worst part, it was coming from the one I carried on my shoulders for years. His name is David, my firstborn. The one I gave an education, food, and shelter to. The one I carried in my arms to the hospital when his asthma flared up. When no one else wanted to get up at dawn. The one I defended even when he made mistakes as a teenager, and I got called into the principal's office, and now here he was, standing in my house with a lawyer, trying to throw me out. "So, did you understand, Mr. Miller?" the kid in the suit asked. I looked him straight in the eye, calm but firm. "I understood, young man. Clearly." David didn't even flinch. He was standing there with his arms crossed, staring at the floor. He didn't have the courage to look at me. And yet, I wondered, was there some doubt in his heart? Some regret? But no. When he finally lifted his head, all I saw was coldness, distance, as if I were a problem to be solved, not a father. They said their goodbyes quickly, mentioning they'd be back in a few days to work out the details of the move. I walked them to the front gate calmly, without rushing, and closed it slowly after they left. I stood there for a while, looking at the cracks in the sidewalk. My dog, Buddy, came up and rested his snout on my leg. I scratched him behind the ears and went back inside. The house was quiet, the way it always is after a blow. I sat in the rocking chair where I usually listen to the radio. I took a deep breath, and only then did I let a single tear fall. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was anger, a quiet but heavy indignation. Because I know myself. I know when my soul slowly starts to rise. I'm not a man who looks for a fight. I never have been. But I'm not a man who puts up with injustice either. I'm not some weak old man. I'm a man who has lived. I've seen a lot in this life. I was a construction worker, a welder, a truck driver. I worked under the hot sun to pay for schools, uniforms, and food. I've lived through different presidents, through recessions, through losses. And now, to be treated like this, as if I were a shadow. That same day, I made some rice and beans and ate while looking at Rose's portrait on the refrigerator. She was smiling with that serene look of hers, like someone who understands everything without needing to say a word. "My love," I told her quietly, my hand on my chest, "I swear they're not going to get me out of here that easily. Because if I learned anything from her, it's that dignity is not for sale." After lunch, I went to the bedroom and pulled an old folder from under the mattress. Inside were all the papers for the house, deeds, receipts, property documents, everything in my name. There was no power of attorney, nothing that gave David the right to sell without my consent. Which meant this contract had a catch, something dirty, and maybe something illegal. I put the papers away again, but this time with a new sense of purpose, and for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep with a faint smile on my lips. The next day, I went to St. Augustine's parish, lit a candle for my Rose, and gave thanks for the peace she always taught me to cultivate, even in the hardest moments. Then I went down to the Italian market, bought some fresh bread, and sat on a bench to watch life go by. Kids running, old men playing checkers, vendors shouting, "Water ice, pretzels." And I thought, life doesn't end just because you've been betrayed. It starts all over again. I returned home with a clearer mind. I knew what I had to do, but I was in no hurry. As they say, an old dog knows the hard road. They think they caught me off guard, that the old man is helpless, that I have no strength left. But they forgot something. The most dangerous strength is the one that comes from silence. After that visit, I spent 2 nights barely sleeping. I'd wake up every so often with the image of David standing in my kitchen, arms crossed, with that hard look on his face, as if I were a stranger. Sometimes you think you know the children you raise, until one day life shows you otherwise. I still couldn't understand at what point my sons stopped being family and became a threat. But if one thing was clear, it was that I couldn't just sit by and wait to be thrown out like a stray dog. No. This old man had lived too long to accept that kind of humiliation. On Wednesday morning, I put on a clean work shirt, combed my hair as best I could in the mirror, and started walking towards Center City. My pace was slow but steady. No one would have noticed, but inside, every step was a decision. First, I went to see Mr. Peterson, an old friend from my days as a bus driver on the Route 47 line. He's not a lawyer, but he's been dealing with paperwork and bureaucracy for years and knows how these things work. He welcomed me with open arms, offered me a coffee with cinnamon, and asked how I was doing. I told him everything, without beating around the bush, from David's arrival with the lawyer to the papers I'd kept for decades. He listened to it all with a frown and tight lips. Then he asked to see the documentation. I took out the folder and put it on the table. He spent more than half an hour going through every single paper. He took out his cell phone, took pictures, made some calls. I just watched him, silently. Finally, he took off his glasses and said, "Ethan, something's not right here. Legally, you're still the sole owner. There's no authorization that would allow your son to have signed for the sale without your signature." I felt a knot in my stomach. It was what I suspected, but hearing it out loud twisted everything inside me. Mr. Peterson looked at me seriously. "This could be serious. Someone either forged your signature or they got a doctored contract. Are you sure you haven't signed anything lately?" I swore I hadn't. Not a single piece of paper, not a single mark. He nodded. "Then this smells like fraud." He explained that to prove it, we'd need an expert to review the documents of the supposed sale, and for that, we needed to see the original contract, not just a copy. I remembered that the lawyer who came with David took all the papers, leaving only a printed copy behind. Mr. Peterson told me the best thing to do was hire a real lawyer, someone who could start legal proceedings if necessary. He recommended a lawyer named Monica Evans, who specialized in property cases and family fraud. He wrote down her address on a piece of paper and told me, "Go see her, Ethan. This woman can't be bought." I left his office with the folder under my arm and a mix of anguish and determination in my chest. I walked to a nearby park, sat on a bench, and closed my eyes. I thought about Rose, how she always said that blood doesn't guarantee a good heart. And that thought hurt because I always believed David was the more noble of my two sons. Michael, the youngest, was more impulsive, more distant. But David, he was my pride, a college graduate, married, with kids. And now he was the one trying to kick me out of my own house. At what point did it all break down? The next day, I took the subway to the Rittenhouse Square area where Monica had her office. The ride was long, and as the train moved forward, I went over my whole life as if it were a series of photographs. Rose in her apron, covered in flour. David playing with a wooden truck I'd made for him with my own hands. Christmas in the backyard, with lights strung up in the trees. All of it seemed so far away now. I arrived at the office right on time. Monica greeted me kindly, but without any condescension. I liked that. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with her hair pulled back and a direct gaze. I explained everything to her from the beginning. She listened carefully, took notes, and asked to see the documents. After reviewing them, she looked at me intently. "Mr. Miller, we have a serious issue here. If what you're telling me is true, we're looking at a possible case of usurpation and document forgery. This can't be solved with a family chat. This is solved in court." I asked her if that meant putting my own son in jail. She took a deep breath. "That depends. But before any punishment, the first thing is to defend your rights, your home, your dignity." That word made me hold my breath. Dignity. I felt Rose squeeze my hand from another world. Monica proposed that we immediately file a request to review the contract in the Public Property Registry and, at the same time, file a lawsuit for nullification due to a forged signature. I said yes without hesitation. She had me sign some documents. And as I did, I felt a strange shift, as if the old man who had learned to stay out of trouble was finally crossing a line. But not out of pride, out of justice. I returned home that afternoon with a strange tiredness, not in my body, but in my soul. Buddy greeted me as always, wagging his tail, faithful in a way few humans are. I poured him some water, put food in his bowl, and sat in my rocking chair. The sun was setting through the trees, in the yard, and the sky had that orange glow that Rose loved so much. I looked at her portrait and, for the first time in days, spoke to her with a firm voice. "My love, I've started the fight. I don't know how this is going to end, but I'm not leaving." That night I ate dinner alone, as I had for years. But something was different. Inside, I no longer felt defeated. I hadn't won anything yet, but I hadn't lost either. Because some battles begin in silence, with a heart on fire. And this one was just getting started. On Friday morning, while I was pruning some plants in the yard, I heard an insistent knock on the gate. Buddy, as always, was the first to arrive, barking. I wiped my hands on the rag on my belt and went to see. It was David. Alone. No lawyer, no papers, no smiles. He was wearing a light blue shirt, half wrinkled, and his face was tense. I looked at him calmly, without opening the gate. "What can I do for you?" I asked bluntly. He looked down for a second, as if he didn't know where to start. Then he lifted his head with that gesture I know so well. The one he's used since he was a kid, when he knew he'd done something wrong but didn't want to admit it. "Can we talk?" he said. "Not out here on the street." I hesitated for a few seconds. Part of me wanted to slam the gate in his face, but another part needed to hear him out. I opened it without another word. He walked in without looking around much, as if he were afraid of encountering the memories. We sat in the kitchen. I offered him coffee. He didn't respond. I poured it anyway. He stared at the cup as if it were an enemy. "Dad, I heard you went to see a lawyer," he blurted out. I took my cup, blew on it calmly, and answered, "That's right. And I also went to the public registry and the notary's office. And to an old friend who knows more about the law than you and that lawyer you brought here." I saw him swallow hard. His face changed, annoyance, contained anger. "Dad, it didn't have to come to this. We could have talked about it as a family," he said in a low but charged voice. I looked at him sternly. "Family? Did you talk to me like family when you walked in here with a lawyer without any warning? When you told me this wasn't my house anymore?" He was silent. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound. Then he got up, paced around the kitchen a bit, and sat down again. "Dad, you know things aren't easy. The house was worth good money, and we needed it." That sentence hit me like a rock. "So you sold me? You put a price on me too?" David lowered his head. "It wasn't like that," he muttered. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "You know what hurts the most, son? It's not the sale. It's that you didn't even have the courage to come alone. You brought a stranger to throw me out, and you did it as if I didn't count anymore, as if I were just part of the inventory." The silence returned, but this time it wasn't weighing on me. It was weighing on him. A few minutes passed. Then we heard the back door open. It was Leo, my grandson, David's oldest son. He's 17, tall, skinny, with that unruly hair that always hangs over his eyes. He saw me sitting there and waved with a smile. Then he saw his father, and his face changed. "What are you doing here?" he asked seriously. David tried to calm him with a gesture. "I just came to talk to your grandfather." But Leo didn't buy it. Talk or pressure him to leave? Because if that's why you're here, you'd better go. I was surprised by the firmness in his voice. He wasn't the same quiet kid he used to be. David stood up. "This is none of your business, Leo. This is between adults." But the boy didn't back down. "Of course it's my business. He's my grandfather. And you're treating him like he's a burden. Have you already forgotten everything he did for you?" The tension rose. I slowly stood up and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Calm down, son. We're not here to fight." Leo looked at me with his eyes shining. "It's just not fair, Grandpa. They can't treat you like this." I patted him on the back. "I know. And that's why I'm doing what I have to do. But without hate. With a clear head." David was red-faced, biting back his words. He looked at me and said, "I just wanted to settle this without lawyers." I answered him clearly. "Then you should have thought of that before you brought one here. Now it's not just your business, it's mine. And it's a matter of justice." He walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned and blurted out, "You're making a mistake. Yours was worse, you fool," I replied. "But the difference is, I'm willing to face mine." After he left, Leo and I sat on the back porch. The sun was already setting, and the sky was painted orange and gray. He told me that ever since he found out what was happening, he couldn't sleep. That he heard his parents talking at night about the problem with Grandpa. And that he felt betrayed too. He hugged me tightly. "I'm with you, Grandpa. No matter what." I felt a warmth in my chest, because in the midst of so much disappointment, that hug was a lifeline. The next day, Monica called. She told me they had officially started the process to stop any eviction attempt. The judge had received the request, and in the next few days there would be a preliminary hearing. She explained that David and his wife would be notified, and that I should be emotionally prepared, because what was coming wouldn't be easy. I thanked her. Not for the legal action, but for the way she spoke to me. Not like a poor old man, but like a man who deserved respect. That afternoon, I went back to the church. I sat in the back pew and closed my eyes. I didn't pray with words. I just took a deep breath and remembered Rose's face. I imagined what she would say if she were here, and I knew, do the right thing, Ethan. But don't lose your soul trying. 3 days after David's visit, there was a knock on the door of his house in the suburbs. It was a clerk from the court. He came with the notice in hand, a formal lawsuit for nullification, due to a false signature and an immediate suspension of any transaction on the property. Leo told me about it that same afternoon, his eyes wide as saucers. "Grandpa, my dad went pale. Mom locked herself in her room and wouldn't come out." I didn't say anything. I just settled deeper into my rocking chair and kept peeling some tangerines. "You already knew that was going to happen, didn't you?" he asked me. I just smiled at him. "Son, when you do the right thing, things start to move on their own." That night, Leo told me there was shouting in his house, loud shouting. His mother, Victoria, was blaming David for doing everything without consulting her properly, for complicating everything. She thought I was just going to leave quietly, that I wouldn't lift a finger. She said it in those exact words. And David, for the first time in a long time, was left without an answer. According to Leo, he just said, "What did you want me to do? My dad always keeps quiet. I never thought he'd fight back." That's the problem, I thought. They raised me to be strong, but they judged me as meek. The next morning I got an unexpected call. It was Victoria. "Mr. Miller," she said in a forced, almost theatrical voice. "Can we talk?" I answered yes, but in the park, not at my house. We met on one of the benches, under the big trees. She arrived dressed as she always does, in her brand-name blouses, low heels, and impeccable makeup. But something in her face was different. There was tension and fear. "Mr. Miller, I just don't want this to end badly. Think about it. You're getting older. Wouldn't you be better off living somewhere more comfortable, smaller, more manageable?" I took a deep breath. "Are you suggesting I give up?" She was taken aback. No, I'm just saying that sometimes it's better to avoid a fuss." I looked her in the eye. "A fuss for whom? For me, who's just defending my home? Or for you, who wanted me out without even a conversation?" Victoria looked down. Her voice trembled. "It's just that David doesn't know how to deal with you. He sees you as so stubborn." I laughed to myself. "I'm not stubborn. I'm firm. It's not the same thing." She tried to soften the situation, to convince me with sweet words, talking about family and tranquility, but I wasn't buying those speeches anymore. In the end, she asked me to think about an amicable solution. I answered with what Rose always used to say. "Friendships are taken care of. Betrayals are faced." She said goodbye without touching me, with a frozen gesture. She knew she had no chance. The following days were a whirlwind. Monica, the lawyer, told me that the preliminary hearing would be in 2 weeks, that David was obligated to appear, and that, in the meantime, the court had blocked any transaction with the house. "The most important thing is that they can no longer move anything without your authorization. You are legally protected," she explained. I was relieved. It wasn't the end, but it was a respite. That afternoon, I went for a walk through the South 9th Street Market. I greeted Mr. Gregory, the one with the dried spices, and Mrs. Stella, who always saves a cannoli for me. Everyone asked how I was, and I just answered, living, as one should. But inside, I felt something I hadn't felt for years. Dignity. Not because I was winning a lawsuit, but because I knew I hadn't let them walk all over me. That same week, I received a letter slipped under my door. It was from Michael, my youngest son. We hadn't heard from him in years. He lived in Ohio with his partner. A very different life, always far from family conflicts. But the letter said, "Dad, I heard from Leo what's going on. I didn't know David had gone this far. I just want you to know that I'm with you, and if you need anything, just tell me." It was hard not to cry, because although Michael was always distant, deep down, he respected me. And that letter was worth more than 1,000 apologies from David. The days became more tense. A car with tinted windows started parking across the street from my house every afternoon. They didn't get out. They just watched. Maybe they were from the lawyer. Maybe David wanted to intimidate me, but I didn't give them any importance. I would wave to them from the yard, let them know this old man doesn't hide. One afternoon, Leo came running. "Grandpa, my parents are fighting harder than ever. My mom wants to go to her parents' house. She says she's not going to stay and face a public scandal." I hugged him. "I'm sorry, son. It's not your fault." "I know," he replied, "but it's unfair that you have to go through this." I stroked his hair. Sometimes, for things to change, someone has to take the first blow. He looked at me with a mixture of pride and sadness. "I want to be like you, Grandpa." I replied with a smile. "No, Leo. You're going to be better." The hearing was approaching, and although my body ached more than usual, my soul was firmer than ever. Rose accompanied me in every thought. And in the silence of the house, between warm toast and the smell of coffee, I understood something that changed everything. This isn't just about this house. It's about my history, about who I am, about what I leave behind. The morning of the hearing dawned cold, with the sky covered by thick clouds over Philadelphia. I got up early, as usual. I made my coffee and sat for a few minutes in the rocking chair before leaving. Buddy looked at me, not understanding much, but with that silent loyalty that only old dogs have. I put on the same white shirt I wore for Leo's baptism and a grey jacket that Rose had given me for an anniversary. I wanted to go as someone defending something sacred, not as a defeated man. Monica picked me up at 8:30 sharp. Her car smelled of lavender and new paper. "Are you ready, Mr. Miller?" she asked as she drove. "Ready since the day they tried to take me out of my house without telling me the truth." She nodded. She said no more. The courthouse was full of people I didn't know. Lawyers from other cases, clerks with folders, and people with tired eyes. We were made to wait in a small room with wooden benches. When we were finally called, I entered slowly but surely. At the back were David and Victoria, sitting next to their lawyer, the same one who had come to my house weeks before. They looked at me. David looked down. Victoria held her head up but wouldn't meet my gaze. The judge was an older man, in his 60s, with a stern face and not much patience. He began by reading the background of the case. He mentioned my full name, David's name, and the file number. Then he asked the plaintiff to speak. Monica stood up, elegant and clear. She explained that I had been the sole legal owner of the property for more than 40 years, that there was no power of attorney and no document that would allow my son to sell the property, and that, therefore, the signature on the contract was forged. "We request, Your Honor, the nullification of the contract of sale for being a fraudulent act, and that the corresponding criminal investigation be initiated in the event that the forged signature is confirmed," she concluded with a firm voice. David's lawyer asked to speak. He said that his client acted in the best interest of the family, that the sale was an attempt to solve financial problems, and that there was a misunderstanding in the form but not in the intent. I swallowed a laugh. How easy it is to disguise greed with pretty words. The judge then asked for my statement. I stood up, walked to the front, and leaned on the edge of the table. I looked at David, then at the judge. "Your Honor, this house isn't just walls and a roof. It's the place where I raised my children, where I buried my wife, where I've cried alone for years without anyone seeing me. I'm not rich. I don't have much. But this is mine. I built it with my hands. I signed for it with my life. And today, someone I brought into this world wanted to take it away from me as if. He is very wrong. I returned to my place. The silence in the courtroom was heavy as lead. The judge then asked for a graphological analysis of the signature. Monica had requested it days before, and it was already in the file. The results were read aloud. Mr. Ethan Miller's signature on the sales contract does not match the comparative samples. It is confirmed that it was forged. Victoria covered her mouth with her hand. David closed his eyes. There was nothing more to say. The judge ordered the definitive suspension of the sales contract, the nullity of the act, and requested that the district attorney's office open an investigation for possible document forgery. I didn't celebrate. I didn't raise my arms. I just breathed. I breathed deeply, like someone refilling their lungs after being underwater for a long time. Outside, Leo was waiting for me with a bag of donuts. "You won, Grandpa," he told me excitedly. I hugged him. "I didn't win, son. I just stood up for what was right." We walked together to the corner. Monica came with me. She thanked me for my trust. "You taught me that some battles are fought without raising your voice." I thanked her back, not with words, but with a look that said it all. Days later, David came to the house alone. He didn't knock on the gate. He stood on the other side of the street. I watched him from the porch. He didn't yell. He didn't ask to come in. He just said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I didn't respond, not out of pride, but because some wounds don't heal with apologies. I just nodded and went back inside. I don't know what will happen to him, or to his marriage, or to everything he built away from me. But I do know that this house will still be standing. And more importantly, so will I. After the hearing, the house became quieter than ever. Not out of sadness, but out of peace. For the first time in many years, I felt that the roof wasn't weighing me down, but protecting me again. Buddy noticed it too. He lay closer to me, as if he understood that something profound had changed. I woke up every morning with less anguish in my chest. I drank my coffee with more flavor, and my steps, though just as slow, felt steadier. David never came back. After that brief, dry apology from across the street, I never heard from him again. Leo told me his father barely spoke, that he spent his afternoons locked in his study, and that Victoria had gone to her parents' house with the younger children. "They say they're taking some time," he told me. I didn't ask any more questions. Not out of disinterest, but because I learned, the hard way, that some things time heals, and others simply have to be left to rot on their own. One morning, while I was sweeping the porch, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Dad?" I turned around, and there was Michael, my youngest son, with more gray in his hair, an overgrown beard, a backpack over his shoulder, and a guilty look in his eyes. We hadn't seen each other in years, maybe since Rose's funeral. "Can I come in?" I nodded. He entered silently, as if he wasn't sure if he belonged there anymore. We sat down in the kitchen. I served him coffee, as always, as if no time had passed. Michael took a sip and looked at me. "I heard what happened. Leo's been telling me everything. I wanted to come sooner, but I didn't know if I'd be welcome." I answered him bluntly. "This is your house, son. Not because of the papers, but because of the life you lived here." He nodded and looked down. I was so far away, but at the same time, so close. I saw how they were treating you, how they were pushing you away, little by little. I was part of that abandonment too. I listened to him silently, because his words weren't asking for judgment, or they were just looking for a place to land. "David made a terrible mistake," he said later, and so did I, for staying quiet for so many years. I put a hand on his shoulder. Son, I'm not looking for blame. I'm just learning to live with what's left. Michael took a deep breath. And what's left, Dad? I answered without hesitation. Peace. And that's priceless. He stayed at the house for a few days. He helped me clean the gutters, painted a part of the wall that was peeling, and fixed a leaky faucet in the bathroom that had been dripping for months. We didn't talk much, but the silence was different. It was companionship, not distance. Sometimes we went out to the market together, like we used to. Everyone in the neighborhood was surprised. Look at that, it's Michael. Where you been, kid? He would just smile, embarrassed. Me too. One afternoon, while we were drinking lemonade on the porch, he told me, I was thinking of staying for a while if you don't mind. I responded with a simple gesture. I lifted the pitcher and poured him some more. Michael understood. Thanks, Dad. I just said, you'll know when it's time to leave. During those days, Monica also visited. She came to leave me the final papers from the trial, all signed and sealed, closing the case. The house is officially safe. No one can touch it without your consent. It's yours legally and definitively. I offered her a seat. She accepted. We chatted about her family, her childhood in the city, the injustices she's seen as a lawyer. She confessed something that stuck with me. The most painful cases I see aren't between strangers. They're between parents and children. Because when that bond breaks, there's no contract that can repair it. I thanked her for everything, but most of all, for believing in an old man that no one else was listening to. As time went by, people in the neighborhood got to know the story. Some congratulated me, others kept quiet. But everyone, looked at me differently, no longer as the silent old man on the corner, but as someone who demanded respect. And that, believe me, carries more weight than any inheritance. One Sunday, Leo came by himself, unannounced. He had a notebook in his hand. What's that you got there, son? I asked him. He sat down in front of me, nervous. I want you to tell me your story, Grandpa. All of it. Since you were a kid. How you met Grandma. How you built this house. I want to write it down. It moved me, deeply. What for, son? Because I don't want anyone else to tell it for you. Because I want to remember it right. And because I want my children, when I have them, to know who you were. I accepted, with tears burning in my eyes. Because in the end, maybe that was the most valuable thing I could leave behind. My voice, my story, my truth. Written by someone who actually wanted to listen. Leo arrived early that Saturday with a spiral notebook, a thermos of coffee, and 2 donuts from the bakery he likes. Today, I want to start from the beginning, Grandpa, he told me. From when? I asked. From before you were a dad. When you were just a kid. We sat in the yard. Under the shade of the lemon tree I planted myself when David was a baby. The sun was slanting down, warm, and the air smelled of damp earth. I looked at him for a moment, so young, with eyes full of curiosity, and I said, All right, but listen with your heart, not just your ears, because there are things you can't write down. You can only feel them. He took notes from the very first word. I told him I was born in 1944 in Philly, when some streets were still cobblestone and horse-drawn carts delivered ice. My father was a carpenter, and my mother was a seamstress. We were 7 siblings, and although we ate potatoes almost every day, we never lacked a roof over our heads or a hand to brush our foreheads while we slept. I told him about my first job, shining shoes outside the Reading Terminal Market, where I learned to look men in the eye. There, son, I told him. I understood that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. Leo wrote silently, attentively. Sometimes he'd ask me to repeat a phrase. Other times he'd just nod, moved. I told him how I met Rose. It was at a church fair at St. Augustine's. She was selling cakes with her aunt. I was wearing shoes that were too tight, but I still dared to ask her to dance. We danced 2 songs, and then she said that was enough. She had to get back to her booth. We both smiled. "And how did you know it was her?" he asked me. Because when she walked away, I felt like the air had been knocked out of me, and I never wanted to feel that way about anyone else again. Hours passed, and I told him how we started building this house. At first, it was just 2 rooms and a bathroom. No finishes, no luxuries. Rose and I slept on a mattress on the floor, and the kitchen was a hot plate set up outside. But it was ours. I laid every brick with my own hands, hammered every nail, ran every wire. "I didn't buy this house, Leo," I said. "I planted it, like you plant a tree." And he wrote it down exactly like that. Then came the children. David was born first, strong, a crybaby, with a tuft of hair that never lay flat. Rose said he was going to be stubborn like me. And he was. Michael was born 3 years later, calmer, quieter. I worked as a driver for the city bus company. Rose took care of the house and did sewing for the neighbors. It wasn't easy, but we were happy. There was never a lack of bread on the table or love in the evenings, I told him. As I spoke, I noticed that Leo wasn't just writing with a pencil. He was writing with his soul. He looked at me with those eyes that don't judge, that only want to understand. I told him how I lost Rose. Pancreatic cancer, quick, cruel, silent. I was left alone with the house and the echo of her laughter. After she was gone, the days grew longer, and the children grew more distant. I didn't dwell on it. It wasn't the time. Leo understood that. When we stopped for lunch, he asked me something I didn't expect. "Did you ever think about leaving here, Grandpa? Leaving the house?" I thought for a moment. Yes, once. Right after Rose's funeral. I sat on that bench in the yard and thought, why stay here if she's not here anymore? But then I heard Buddy whining, and I remembered that someone had to keep watering the garden. That love doesn't go away completely. It hides in the walls, in the corners, in the habits. After lunch, we continued. I told him about what life was like before the internet, before phones in our pockets. I told him how we used to go to Fairmount Park on Sundays with the kids, how we'd buy lemon water ice from the cart on the corner. I told him about the respect we used to have for our elders, how a person's word was enough. Now, many people believe that age gets in the way, that we old folks are a burden, but they don't know that without us, they wouldn't be where they are. Leo stopped there, closing his notebook for a moment. "Grandpa, I've been unfair to you too." I looked at him. "Why do you say that, son?" "Because I saw you as someone from the past, as if you were just standing still, waiting. But now I understand that you're the root of everything of my dad, of my life, of this story." I was touched, but I didn't say anything. I just squeezed his shoulder tightly, the way gratitude is passed between men who understand each other without speaking. In the evening, he asked for permission to take pictures of the house, of the cracks in the walls, the old gate, the tree I planted with Rose. "I want everything documented," he said. "Not just what you say, but also what you see." I said yes, because I understood that what he was doing wasn't just for him. It was for the generations to come. So that one day, when I'm no longer around, someone will say, "Ethan Miller lived here. A man who refused to be bent." That night, Leo stayed to sleep in the room that was once Michael's. Before he turned off the light, he said to me from the doorway, "Thank you, Grandpa, for your story." I replied from my rocking chair, "Take care of it, son, not as a secret, but as a treasure." A few weeks passed since Leo started writing my story. Every weekend, he came with his notebook, his tape recorder, and that look of someone who doesn't just come to visit, but to listen. He would ask for details, for dates, and sometimes, while I was talking, I'd see him wipe his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. But the most curious thing began to happen outside this house. One afternoon, Leo told me he had read a fragment of the story at his school. It was for a literature class, and the teacher had asked for autobiographical texts. Without saying whose it was, he read the part where I told him how I met Rose at the church fair. According to him, when he finished reading, the whole class was silent. No one said anything for several seconds. Then a classmate raised her hand and asked, "Is that man still alive?" Leo answered yes, that he was his grandfather, and that's when it all began. A few days later, a teacher pulled him aside. She asked if he could share the text with a friend of hers who worked at a community radio station in Philadelphia. Not to make him famous, she told him, but because there are many older people who need to hear something like this. A story with soul. Leo told me about it with enthusiasm. I, as always, was quiet for a while before responding. "And what do you think, son?" "I think your story can help others. Grandparents like you, who sometimes have no one to listen to them." I thought about it all night. I walked around the yard. I sat on the cement bench where Rose used to put her flower pots, and I looked at the walls of this house as if I were seeing them for the first time. Each crack held a memory, each old tile, a conversation. I always believed that living with dignity was enough, that one didn't need applause or tributes. But maybe, just maybe, telling what I had lived was also a part of that dignity, because silence often turns into oblivion, and I didn't want my story to be forgotten. So I told Leo I accepted. If that man from the radio wanted to talk to me, we would. But on one condition, that they wouldn't make anything up, that they wouldn't embellish my words, that they would tell my story as it is, with dirt on my hands and jam on my toast. A week later, Jacob Reed came to visit. A man in his 50s with a thin beard and light eyes. He had an old tape recorder, the kind you don't see anymore, and a soft voice, like a kind grandfather's. He sat down at the table with me, took out his notebook and said, "Mr. Miller, first of all, thank you for having me. What you've lived through, many live through in silence, and I think we need to hear it." I nodded. "I'm not a writer or an artist. I'm just an old man who didn't want to leave quietly." Jacob smiled. "Sometimes those are the ones we need to hear from the most." The interview lasted almost 2 hours. We talked about everything. About my childhood, about Rose, about David's betrayal, about the trial, about Leo, about what it means to be old in a country that often makes you invisible. I told him how there are days when you wake up and your body hurts, but it's not your back that weighs the most. It's the silence of not having anyone to tell. I told him that there are thousands like me, sitting in old chairs, looking out the window, waiting for someone to look back at them. And that, although some would have us believe we're not worth anything anymore, we still have something that no one else has. Memory. When he left, Jacob shook my hand tightly. "Thank you for your courage. This story isn't just yours. It belongs to all of us." I didn't know what would happen next, but I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. A purpose. As if this life, with all its wounds, still had something to give. A few days later, Leo arrived, agitated. "Grandpa, the program is on." It was broadcast on a local community radio station in a segment called Philly Voices. He put the headphones on me, and there I was, with my trembling but firm voice, talking about things I never thought would be heard outside these walls. At the end of the program, Jacob said something that moved me to tears. Ethan Miller taught us that silence is not the same as resignation, that sometimes, when an old man speaks, the world should be quiet and listen. The next morning, a neighbor knocked on my gate. Mrs. Lupita, a lady who lives 3 houses down. She's been a widow for 20 years. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I heard your story on the radio, and I felt like you were speaking for my husband. He died waiting for his children to visit him. Thank you for saying what many of us couldn't." I hugged her. For a long time. With respect. From that day on, I started getting letters. Yes, letters. Some left under the gate, others delivered by Leo. People from Pittsburgh, from Scranton, from all over. Older people. Regretful children. Confused grandchildren. All with something in common. They wanted to thank me for not staying quiet. I didn't seek fame. I didn't seek revenge. I just wanted respect. And, without meaning to, I ended up finding something more powerful. An echo. My voice was no longer just my own. One morning, while I was making oatmeal, there was a soft knock on the door. It wasn't Leo or a neighbor. It was Monica, the lawyer. She was accompanied by an elegant woman, about 60 years old, with a folder under her arm. She introduced herself as Teresa Alcott, coordinator of the Voices of Experience program, an initiative that sought to highlight the life stories of older adults throughout the state. She greeted me with respect, with a sincere smile, but also with the look of someone with a proposal in her hands. We sat at the table, drank coffee, and then she explained. "Mr. Miller, your story has become well known. The radio interview had a huge impact. We received dozens of messages asking about you, about your story, about your courage. We want to invite you to be a special speaker at our next event in Center City, where we'll be talking about elder neglect, the right to housing, and above all, respect." I listened in silence. She spoke in measured, sweet, almost poetic words. She talked about giving a speech, about telling my story in a forum full of people, with cameras, with young people, with other grandfathers and grandmothers like me. Your testimony can inspire, can open eyes, can change the way we look at old age in this country. I didn't respond immediately. To tell the truth, I didn't know what to say. Monica looked at me, as if asking with her eyes what I was thinking. I just said, "Can I think about it?" Teresa smiled. "Of course. We just wanted you to know that your voice is no longer just your own." She left me a card, and they said a fond farewell. After they left, I went out into the yard. The sun was just barely hitting the lemon tree. I sat on the bench and stayed there for a long time. I wasn't afraid to talk. I had already done that. What made me uneasy was something else. What if, by telling my story once again, it became someone else's? What if, by making it public, it stopped being mine? I thought of Rose, how she was discreet, a woman of few words, but strong as an oak. She wouldn't have wanted me to expose myself, but she also wouldn't have wanted me to stay quiet if it could help others. I thought of Leo and what this legacy meant to him. I thought of the letter Michael had left me before returning to Ohio. What you did, Dad, wasn't just for you. It was for all those who didn't dare. That night I didn't sleep much. I got up 3 times. Once to see if Buddy had water. Another to check if the wind was blowing in the yard. And the last time? Just to look at the house in silence, to walk through its rooms, to run my hand along the door frames, to listen to the faint echo of my own footsteps. All of this was almost taken from me. All of this I defended. The next morning, I called Leo. "Son, could you come by this afternoon? There's something I want to tell you." He arrived at noon with his notebooks and his usual smile. We sat down with a couple of sandwiches we made together. And then I asked him, "What would you do if you were asked to tell something out loud that hurts, but that could help others?" He didn't hesitate. "I'd tell it. With fear. With nerves. But I'd tell it because if I don't, maybe no one else will. I told him about the event, about the speech, about the stage. He listened attentively. Then he stared at me. Grandpa, no one can force you to do anything. But if you decide to speak, I'll be there, by your side. And that was enough for me. That afternoon, I called Teresa. I accept, I told her, but on one condition, that you let me speak as I am. No script, no frills. She smiled on the other end of the phone. That's exactly what we want, Mr. Miller. Over the next few days, Leo helped me prepare some notes. Not a speech, just ideas, key memories, phrases I wanted to say. We practiced a few times in the yard. I would stumble over my words. I would stop. I would laugh. But every time I spoke, something in me was affirmed, as if I finally understood that everything I had experienced had a greater meaning. The day came. I put on my best pants, the blue shirt Rose adored, and a hat I had kept for years. Leo accompanied me, his eyes shining. In the auditorium, there were more than 100 people. Seniors, students, social workers, journalists. When I was introduced, there was a long round of applause. I walked slowly to the microphone. My hands were shaking a little, but my voice came out steady. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 81 years old, and until recently, they wanted to kick me out of my own house, not by strangers, by my own son. The silence was total. I told my story without anger, without exaggeration, as someone who shares, not as someone who accuses. I spoke of Rose, of Leo, of justice, of respect. And I closed with something that came from my soul. In this country, we old people are sometimes seen as a burden, but we are the root. And if the roots dry up, the tree has no future. The applause that followed didn't make me happy. It made me strong, because I knew at that moment that I was not alone. When we returned home after the event, the Philadelphia sky was painted a soft orange that melted between the treetops. Leo helped me take off my jacket, offered me a cup of tea, and we sat for a while on the porch. But he lay down at my feet, as usual. We didn't talk much that night. Sometimes the silence between us spoke louder than any words. I looked at the house with different eyes. Not because it had changed, but because I had finally changed inside it. That house that was once a threat was now a shelter again. My walls, my yard, my history. And now, also, my voice. The next day, Leo arrived early. He brought something wrapped in brown paper, tied with a red ribbon. "This is for you, Grandpa." I opened it slowly. It was a book, small, hardcover. On the cover, the title, Ethan Miller, Memoirs of a Man Who Refused to be Bent. I opened it and began to look at the pages. It was all there, from my childhood to the trial, from Rose to Leo. My words, my sentences, my silences too. "I printed it with my savings," he told me. "Only 10 copies. For you, for Michael, for the neighbors, for the school library, and for me." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged him. For a long time. Quietly. Like the hugs that are given when explanations are no longer needed. That afternoon, I went for a walk in the neighborhood. I was greeted from every corner. Mrs. Stella gave me a pastry. Mr. Gregory offered me some spices for free. A little boy came up to me and said, "Are you the man from the radio?" I smiled at him. "Yes, son, the same one who still eats toast with jam." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But inside me, something deep settled. I was no longer invisible. In the evening, I sat in my rocking chair and opened the book again. I read my own words quietly. I heard myself tell how I met Rose, how I built this house, how I lost, and how I resisted. And there, in that moment, I understood something I had never said out loud, Justice doesn't always give you back what was taken from you, but it gives you back what you should never have let them take from you: self-respect. The next day, I received a letter. It was from Michael. He told me he read the whole book in one night. That he cried, that he laughed, that he was proud to carry my last name. Dad, what you did is more than defending a house. It's teaching us all not to be afraid to say, enough is enough. I kept that letter in the book, between the pages where I talk about them, my children. Because even if they don't all come back, at least they will know who I am. David never came back. I don't wait for him. I don't hold grudges. But I don't seek reconciliation either, because some things aren't fixed with a forced hug. They're settled with truth. And if someday he wants to know it, he knows where to find it. In these pages, in this house, in the memory of an old man who did not kneel. Days later, Leo was asked to read an excerpt from the book at his school's cultural festival. He did so in front of everyone. He said, "My grandfather taught me that dignity has no age, and that memory is the bravest form of resistance." They gave him a standing ovation. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I was at home, in my rocking chair, with Buddy at my feet, watching the sun set over the city. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace.